Let's talk about jewelry today. After my previous video about the Cartier Trinity ring, quite a few of you reached out to me and asked me to do another video about yet another iconic design by the house of Cartier, the Love Bracelet. So here we are. This is probably one of the most known designs by Cartier. Celebrities are fans of the Love Bracelet, and I see it very frequently. Sometimes it feels you can't really escape that design, and I think another boost for this bracelet was in 2016 when Kylie Jenner could not take this Love Bracelet off, and it started this whole discussion. I really don't know why there's always some kind of link to the Kardashian-Jenner clan, but this is a different story. In this video I'm going to look into the details behind this Love Bracelet, because there's actually much more to it than the issues at airport security. And before I look into these details, I would like to say that this is a non-sponsored video and I'm just sharing my personal opinion and my research here. What is the Love Bracelet? It's an oval shaped bracelet. It is oval so that it stays close to the wrist, and it comes with two separate parts that are then held together by separate screws. It also comes with a separate screwdriver. So basically it is kind of handcuffed to your wrist, and you need somebody else to help you put this bracelet on or take it off. Even though I know some people who have also managed to do it themselves, but the idea is basically you need the help of somebody else. And these two screws that hold the bracelet together are actually a reference of yet another famous Cartier product, the Santos watch, which has this characteristic crown on the side. Even though a lot of people may think that this is quite a recent design by Cartier, it was actually already created in 1969 by the Italian jewelry designer Aldo Cipullo. And what I find really interesting about it is that he actually said he wanted to create a piece of jewelry which doesn't show status or wealth. And when we put this in the context today, I find this interesting because sometimes I have the feeling that a lot of people purchase the Love Bracelet because other people know it is the Love Bracelet, it is Cartier, you can check the prices, so it's kind of like showing the status that you can afford Cartier. I don't know, maybe this is just my opinion. What do you think about this? But let's focus more on the designer. Who was Aldo Cipullo? He was born in 1935 in Naples in Italy, and he had always been surrounded by jewelry because his family worked in the jewelry trade. Later on, also his brother Renato became a jewelry designer, and their father was very authoritarian, and Aldo for a very long time dreamt of escaping the family, the father, and also escaping to America. And this is exactly what he did. In 1959 he emigrated to New York. He studied at the School of Visual Arts, and 2 years after his arrival he started to work for David Webb, a well-known jeweler. And we also have to put this into context because New York is still a very interesting and bustling place, but at the time it was very, very special because there were multiple things going on. On the one hand, there were social and economic issues, but this also meant that rents were relatively cheap, so artists could afford to have their studios in the city. For example, Andy Warhol also worked in the city, and actually Aldo was friends with Andy Warhol. He was a bon vivant, he was very much part of the jet set. And when we think about 1969, what comes to mind? Make love, not war. The whole attitude towards love, relationships, all of these things changed, and this also very much influenced the work of Aldo. Aldo then worked for Tiffany & Co., and some people call his designs graphic modernism. And what is actually interesting is he offered the design for the Love Bracelet to Tiffany & Co., but they declined, so he ended up going to Cartier, who then snapped up the design. Now let's look at the meaning of this bracelet. I'm going to start with the most obvious one, and this is also the interpretation which I found most often in the articles, probably because it's the obvious one. They say that he was interested in the industrial elements of New York City, but especially the hardware stores that he visited with his brother. I think this is quite obvious. He's also behind the nail bracelet by Cartier, the Juste un Clou. So this is one interpretation which is quite easy. Okay, he had a passion for hardware stores and also all these tools. Most articles stop here. It's this passion for hardware stores, that's it. Well, as I said, obvious and probably one source of inspiration, but after reading more about Aldo Cipullo and his design approach, I thought there must be more to it. So of course the art historian in me started digging a bit more, and then I found more information. So first of all, he designed the bracelet, or it is said that he designed the love bracelet when he himself was going through a breakup and he was holding on to memories of a past love. I also have a quote for you here. I felt very sad. I wanted something no one could take away from me. I was searching for a permanent symbol of love. And this is exactly what he did, because this love bracelet is a permanent token of love because it's not supposed to be taken off. Furthermore, we have the two halves of the bracelet, and they stand for day and night that come together to form a whole. And also because as you are not supposed to take it off, you wear it day and night. So it becomes something permanent. And I already mentioned before that he changed the view of jewelry. First of all, that it was not meant to show status, but there's also another detail. This piece of jewelry was quite a new idea because it was one of the rare incidents where a piece of jewelry did not have to match the particular outfit that you're wearing, because you wear this all the time and it basically matches all your outfits. So this was quite an innovative approach at the time. And I already mentioned before what was going on in the 60s and 70s. The overall approach or views towards love and relationships changed also, and this also influenced his design, and this design is actually unisex. So it was not designed for one specific gender, which was also fairly new. I also mentioned this regarding the Trinity ring, which was designed earlier than the love bracelet, and this love bracelet takes this up. So still, even though it was after the Trinity ring, it was still something that was relatively rare. There are rumors that Aldo initially insisted that the love bracelet has to be sold as a pair. I could not confirm this in writing, but I actually think that might be true, because this is this overall idea. Both partners have these kind of handcuffs, so they put the bracelet on each other, and every partner has the screwdriver for the other partner's bracelet, and then it kind of works like a permanent love contract, we could say, and it is a partnership at an equal level. But as we know, the love bracelet is sold as one piece, and I find this quite interesting because then also the meaning may change a bit, because then only one partner receives that love bracelet and the other one has the screwdriver, and this then can also be interpreted as kind of a power game, that this other person has the power over the person who is handcuffed. Another source of inspiration for the designer was actually the chastity belt from the Middle Ages, which stood for purity and loyalty, and he wanted to create something which also shows this purity and loyalty in a contemporary way. So this is what the love bracelet, this handcuff, basically also refers to. And there was also a time where Cartier sold this screwdriver as a pendant so that the other partner could wear it on a necklace. I'm not sure if this is still being produced because I could not find it online. I only found it on vintage websites. So maybe you know more about that. Let me know in the comments below. So now we have the interpretation regarding the hardware. We have the interpretation of the eternal love. What I found interesting is that most of the articles focus on those two. The shape of the bracelet, they write a lot about this, but then I kept looking at the pattern on the love bracelet. And I thought there must be more to it. So the first interpretation, of course, is this obvious one. You could say this just takes up the idea of the screwdriver because this is the screw that is just repeated on the bracelet. So it reinforces the idea, it reinforces the permanent love contract. This would be the obvious interpretation. But again, as I said, I could not stop digging because I thought if this designer really thought so much about this meaning of permanent love, it can't be just a coincidence or this mere relationship to hardware that he put that on the bracelet. So I started to look for more. You may know what this means. Now let's do a brief excursion into art history and symbolism. I can't help it, but I wanted to look at this in more detail. So we have this circle with the horizontal line. It looks a bit like the London Tube sign or the no entry sign. But what could this mean? So first of all, it could mean that these are two halves coming together, and this is actually reinforcing the idea of the bracelet and its shape overall, because two halves are coming together, day and night are coming together to form a whole, the unity. So again, yes, it looks like this screw and the screwdriver, but it could also reinforce the idea of two partners coming together to form a whole, a unity and a long-lasting relationship. And then I took it a step further and looked at symbolic meanings and also ancient scripts. So when we analyzed paleography, which is the study of ancient scripts, this symbol, this circle with the horizontal line, stands for the number 100. And this number also has some meaning. For example, it very often stands for perfection. In Christianity, it means divine completeness. And it's quite interesting because there are quite a few sources quoting Aldo Cipullo, saying that he wanted to create something simple but perfect. So even if he was not aware of this meaning, and let's assume it was a coincidence, even though I doubt it was a coincidence, but let's just assume this, it's actually quite nice to see that this number or this symbol also stands for what he wanted to achieve with this simple yet perfect design for Cartier. So this is one possible interpretation. I also found that this symbol in ancient script sometimes stood for seed, or that it was used on counting stones, but I could not really establish a link here with the love bracelet without being too speculative, so let's leave this to the side. But what I did find, and what is very interesting, is this symbol in alchemy actually stands for salt. And salt stands for long-lasting relationships and friendships. So I think this is again quite a fitting interpretation of this pattern on the love bracelet. And salt has quite an important meaning across cultures and religions. Maybe you have heard about the superstition that you should throw salt over your shoulder to fight evil spirits or even the devil. In some cultures, salt is gifted when you move into a new house, for example, or at weddings, because salt is considered auspicious. It stands for prosperity and good luck. And in some cultures, it actually stands for purity. And this is something that I personally find very interesting, because I mentioned the inspiration for the love bracelet before, that the chastity belts of the medieval times stood for purity, and salt stands for purity, and then we have the symbol of salt also taken up in the bracelet. And the last interpretation that I would like to discuss here relates to this unisex approach. I already said before, Aldo did not design this with one gender in mind. He wanted to create something for everyone. And I'm not sure if he was aware of this at the time when he designed it, but when we put it in today's context, what I find interesting is that the symbol that we have on the love bracelet, this circle with the horizontal line, also is the symbol for a gender. So this is another interesting link that we can establish when it comes to the love bracelet. Okay, now no more info about art history or symbolic meanings. How did this love bracelet turn into a global success? I already mentioned before that Aldo Cipullo was working in New York, and he presented the design to Tiffany & Co. They rejected it, and he went to Cartier. And the chief executive, Michael Thomas, immediately saw the potential and took the design up. And what we have to bear in mind here is that Cartier worked differently back then. Today it's very much centralized, and back then the branch in New York had more power. They could launch their own designs. Even when you look for the love bracelet today and you find the old advertisements, it says that it was designed in New York. And this was also due to the fact that after Pierre Cartier passed away in 1964, the family sold the business, and there were a lot of structural changes in the company. So this is the reason why also New York had more freedom, and why the chief executive in New York could decide on taking on this design for Cartier. And the way Cartier promoted the product after its launch could be called influencer marketing in today's terms, because it is rumored that the company sent the bracelet to 25 celebrity couples, like Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, Sophia Loren and Carlo Ponti, and Nancy and Frank Sinatra. And there's also one, let's say, spicy story involving the love bracelet. Actor Ally McGraw wore this bracelet at the set of The Getaway. She filmed that in 1972, and this love bracelet was given to her by her then husband, Robert Evans. But then on the set of The Getaway, she fell in love with her co-star Steve McQueen, and they ended up getting married afterwards. So it's quite interesting. She was wearing this love bracelet, this symbol of permanent love and purity, and this chastity belt, by another husband while meeting the next husband. And also today, so many celebrities are fans of the love bracelet. Some stack the bracelet, others wear different items of this love collection. And in general, as I mentioned before, it is a very popular piece of jewelry. And there are rumors that some hospitals in New York City actually have some of these screwdrivers, because if there is an emergency, they can take off that bracelet. I'm not sure if this is an urban myth. I actually think it is, because when I think about my own situation, if I wore this bracelet and there was an emergency and then they would take time to screw off that bracelet, I'm not sure if this is really done. I actually think they would cut it off, but I don't know. Maybe the rules are different in New York City. If you have heard about this, please let me know in the comments below. I personally like this backstory of the bracelet and also the meaning behind it, but personally I don't really like it when I can't take off my jewelry, also for the simple reason that I travel a lot and I don't always want to run into issues at airport security. But maybe if you own the love bracelet and you have more experience with airport security, you can let me know in the comments below. I would really appreciate it. But this popularity also led to challenges for Cartier, because this is one of the most counterfeited products. So in 1974, the company also started to put a serial number into the bracelet, and this is something that you have to bear in mind if you buy it secondhand. Always make sure that you have this serial number. As I said in other videos, the serial number alone is not a guarantee that it is an authentic product, but it is one thing that you should tick off your list. And another interesting thing about this bracelet is that it reflected also the relationship between Cartier and the designer, because Cartier let Aldo Cipullo sign the love bracelet. And this was not done very often. It is still not done very often. It is something very special if such a big brand allows the designer to put their signature on the design. I found some articles that claimed that initially this love bracelet was sold in a gold-plated version. I could not confirm this in any way by Cartier. I did not find any other scientific sources for this. I'm not really sure about this, because I found an advertisement from 1970 which promoted the love bracelet in 18 karat gold. So either there were different versions and the gold-plated version was one of them, or this is just an urban myth or a rumor which cannot be confirmed. At the time of the launch, the love bracelet was sold for $250. Over time, Cartier also started to produce this love bracelet made from different materials, for example, platinum or rose gold. In 1978, they launched a version replacing these screw heads or the circle with the horizontal line by diamonds. And in 2006, they launched a version with diamond pavé, and also the circle with this horizontal line was then made from black ceramic. And in 2008, they also launched a version using colorful stones. And there have also been different versions of the bracelet when it comes to the width. For example, there is a smaller size version. There's also a version where you don't need the screwdriver because it's open at one end, so you can just put it on without this whole screwdriver mechanism. And today the love collection involves much more than just the bracelet and the different versions of it. There are rings, earrings, necklaces. There was a charity version for it. And at the time of filming this video, the lowest price for a piece of this love collection was 640 euros for one single earring. It's like a stud with this screw pattern with the circle and the horizontal line, which is about $690 at the time of filming this video. The wedding band, the ring version of this love collection, was selling at the time of filming this video for 1,350 euros, which is around $1,460. And this iconic love bracelet in the yellow gold version currently sells for 7,950 euros or $8,620. And then of course the price goes up and up and up. There are no limits at Cartier. The most expensive item of the collection online was a necklace, a diamond pavé necklace for 70,000 euros. But I assume there are also custom orders at Cartier for this particular design. And I also saw that, for example, the wedding band can be customized by putting a solitaire diamond on it. The price was not listed because, needless to say, it depends on the diamond ornament that you are going to choose to put on this particular wedding band. As I mentioned before, this was not the only design by Aldo Cipullo for the house of Cartier. He is behind Juste un clou, just a nail, this nail bracelet. And again, the interpretations online are always only focusing on this hardware aspect. Yes, this is obvious, but there are also sources quoting him when he said he was inspired by the simplicity of a nail, yet its importance, and he realized that when he wanted to hang a painting or a picture in his house and he didn't have a nail. So this is one interpretation. In another quote, he mentioned spirituality because he said he was inspired by Christianity, by Jesus being put on the cross using nails. So this is another interpretation. And then I found another quote where he said that he stepped onto a nail in his Gucci loafers. So we see there are many different sources of inspiration that could have influenced him. We have the hardware store, we have the simplicity of the nail, we have this spiritual meaning, and then also we have the jet set, the bon vivant reflected in the story that he stepped on a nail wearing Gucci loafers. And another famous design by Aldo Cipullo for Cartier was the Hand of the Heart pendant, which was famously worn by Elton John. It also appeared on screen because Ellen Burstyn was wearing it in The Exorcist. And after working with Cartier, Aldo Cipullo also worked as an independent designer for 10 years. I personally really enjoyed the research about the love bracelet, not only to learn more about the bracelet itself, but also to get to know Aldo Cipullo, because very often we know these iconic designs, we associate them with the big brands, but we forget about the designer. There's also a book about the designer, and it seems that he was a very interesting personality. So if you want me to do another video about his life and also his design aesthetics and his work for Tiffany & Co., Cartier, but also under his own name, let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you could help me by liking it and also by subscribing to my channel. It really helps me with producing this weekly content for you. If you want to read more about fashion related topics, you can also head over to my website, thepinklookbook.com, and you can also check out my fashion label Pelagona. And if you enjoyed this video and you haven't watched it yet, you can learn more about the iconic Cartier Trinity ring in my other video. Thank you very much for joining me in this video, and see you in the next one.